Thank you so much all for coming. My question is for Anastacia. I was wondering what you pack your daughters for lunch now.
What I actually
pack them.
What do you pack?
Okay. Here I have to confess that I am a mom. I don't really pack their lunches. They do it themselves. But they do pack. I have to say that they do eat a rather lot of energy bars. After I wrote the book, I realized that it was just really another kind of candy bar, and that I should try and get them to eliminate them. So but I haven't been able to entirely. So they do. It's sort of a balance. So yeah, I have to say, rather embarrassingly, that what was in my lunchbox is kind of like what they eat.
Thank you. Not to put you on the spot. I was just interested.
I wish I could say that I have made some changes based on all the things that I've learned. And like the one thing that I do is I always buy. I actually lucky to live near a bakery, and I buy a baguette every day. I don't buy something bread. They just have the restructured meat and all sorts of things. So, but my kids themselves, they're kind of over on the other side, I'm afraid.
I have two questions. Can you enlighten us as to the, I'm speaking specifically to Maureen, but I'd like everybody else's comment. Do you keep track of the amount of food that is prepared that is actually not eaten, and is it all thrown out? And is that something that matters to you? And is that something that you can track over time? And then secondly, fast food. To what extent is the fast food component of the out-of-home dining in America, staying flat, hopefully going down, but I don't know, and I'd love to know.
So waste absolutely matters to us a lot. We actually did a waste project with Chris in his class in the fall. We've been composting for I think 10 years now, and we're very conscious as far as food preparation to really prepare in batches so we don't have a lot of waste. And we're always thinking about if there's an extra rotisserie chicken at the end of the night, is that chicken soup the next day or chicken pot pie? So waste is actually one of those lenses that's like right here, and our students are very concerned about it. We also donate if we're doing a large event or something and we have an unexpected low turnout, something like that, we donate to either Rosie's Place, Penn Street Inn, Food Bank, things like that. So we're very concerned about that, as well as we have a group of students that are looking at a trayless initiative, which will help reduce waste as well. So waste is a big thing here.
I thought, evidently incorrectly, that that donating food that isn't consumed is somehow legally restricted. And I'd like to know what guys do. I belong to a club, a fancy club, and we waste an unbelievable amount of food. And I've inquired about that, and basically it's thrown out because they can't give it away.
That's not true. Good.
It's a more complicated question. I used to think that too. That food rescue has become much more sophisticated, and there are certain things that you can't donate. Certainly, it's complicated to. For a long time, especially when I was in the restaurant business, I was astounded by the fact that I had all this food that I'd be throwing out of the dumpster, but I couldn't legally give it away, and that was distressing to me because I had really no choice, but the food was good. But we have much more, first of all, there's a different consciousness about food waste, not only in the law, but also in the producers, whether it's the dining halls or the restaurants, caterers, and we've cultivated over the last couple of years a series of recipients who would take the food and health regulations that go along with that. So instead of having to throw an entire, 4 sheet pans of lasagna away, there are places, and you have to know who you can give it to. But I'd just like to say one other thing on the other part of your question, which is about fast food, because fast food is changing. It's not it started to happen probably about 15 or 20 years ago when the big food companies started buying other companies, and particularly when Coke and Pepsi started buying and started creating bottled water companies. What we think of as bottled water companies are really just Coke and Pepsi and many other bottling plants filtering water and putting it in bottles. But the other thing is that fast food chains that aren't diversified, like McDonald's, are having trouble. PepsiCo, for example, is a much more diversified company, and they're doing better. But the emerging chains We have a couple in Boston now that are starting to hit the, Dig In and, what's the wonderful, Sweetgreen and Panera. And people want to go to places where they can eat, and they've been very clever about, they can't get the price point to be the same, but they're working on price points that are acceptable. But the whole ethos around fast food is changing, not for everybody, because nothing ever changes for everybody. And it is still cheaper to feed a family on Big Macs than it is at Sweetgreen. But it's changing, and those companies are starting to feel, especially in the United States, that their hegemony is waning.
And also, just on the food waste thing, there's federal law that actually creates spaces for food donation. So actually, it's called Good Samaritan kind. So they're actually, they're actually easier to do donations than people think.
Hi, my question's for Anastacia, but I think also maybe the whole panel. Why has this culture of, I guess like the way of eating that they did in the military, packaged food, food that doesn't go bad for a really long time, why has that persisted for so long past the war? Like, is it just cost and convenience, or do you think that there could be something beyond that?
Why did
why that way of eating that they were eating in the military, like with the sandwiches and everything, why has that persisted into just normal mainstream life?
Okay, well, again, going back, there's this whole idea of preparedness, and because of that, these federal laboratories, there are 80 of them around the country, they actually have a mandate, like it's written into law, that they have to get any science and technology that they develop into consumer products, not only for food, but for everything. And the reason for that is that it makes it much quicker and easier in the event of a large-scale military conflict for the private sector to switch over to supplying the military. I'm not kidding here. So in the case of food, that means that if the military disseminates the research and that it does with big companies, and it not only does the research, it funds research at universities, and it also does a lot of cooperative projects with both universities and big companies figuring out new science. Once that science is out there, usually it's sort of the big issues in how to process food. It's not sort of figuring out flavor additions or shapes of cookies, etc., but things on how to preserve it better, or how to make it add nutritional value, whatever. That then is in the public domain. It's free, and it helps the company be more profitable because suddenly they can make the food last a lot longer, or they can produce it more cheaply, etc., etc. So there's this incentive for the companies to take that free science and technology and use it in their products because it makes them more profitable. Does that explain the answer?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks. I guess I was also kind of just wondering if you think that there's any cultural influence on that, or do you think it's really just the mandate and the fact that demand is there that we're buying it?
Well, let me say that it's a historic influence, so it's almost impossible to separate it, because this is really coming right out of World War II, when the whole consumer food industry was created, and it grew up together. So it's not like this is suddenly appearing and saying, hey, guys, let's work together. This is just kind of evolved that way. So it's also sort of a feedback. So the more we get used to eating these kinds of foods in our own homes or in the office, then we feel more, then soldiers are more comfortable and enjoy eating them in the field, which is something that is useful for the Army. They're actually always looking to make soldiers eat more because, believe it or not, during moments of high stress and conflict, one of the problems is anorexia, or people not eating enough calories. So if they come already to the military used to eating, like all of our kids are eating energy bars, then when they're given an energy bar as an emergency combat ration, they're like, hey, fine, this reminds me of home. It's not like some weird Army food. Does So there is this kind of cultural sort of system where the more consumers eat these kind of food, the better it is for the military, and the more the military can kind of spread that out. Did you want to talk to someone else on that?
Oh, no. Thank you.
Back there first.
Thank you so much for the talk. I have questions specifically for Andrew. And my first question is, can you tell us more about the sourcing of the ingredients? Like, are they mostly from the New England area, or like, can you tell us more about that?
Sure.
And then for the second part is the one of the statistics that you showed us is that 55% of the consumers who are interested in a meal kit service is because they want to reduce food waste. And then assuming that's more talking about reducing food waste on the consumer, the user end, but there's still going to be food waste generated in the supplier side. And then so like when you're talking about packaging meals for those users, like, what are some things that Purple Care has been doing to reduce food waste on your side?
Sure, thanks for the questions. Maybe I'll take it in reverse order. So that study from Peapod, I think, addressed it with respect to people wanting to cook at home, for the belief that if you cook at home, you can control your food waste more effectively. So that was and I look at that as a signal to people's interest in meal kits, because there is zero waste for any meal kit, whether it's Purple Carrot or any of the others that I talked about. So I just was drawing that parallel. With respect to what we do, we have distribution in New York and Los Angeles, and we reach about 75% of the United States with our product. And in those two distribution centers, any of the meals that we prepare, that we have sort of an advance notice, right? So if someone places an order, we have about 6 days before that meal gets packaged and shipped out to the customer. So we can predict with great precision what amount of food we need to receive from our suppliers and producers to minimize that waste, but whatever we still have gets donated to, there's an organization called City Harvest in New York that takes our donations, and another one in LA. Broadly speaking, you asked at the top about where we source. So when I first started the business, which was out of my garage for the first month and in my house, and then slowly got a bit bigger, I believed that local was such an important component to differentiating ourselves in the marketplace. And sort of was studying the behaviors of people shopping in local markets and seeing that and wanting to replicate that in our meal kit, and realized that, you know, when my mother-in-law in Bethesda, Maryland was ordering for me to be nice to me, it wasn't local to her, or my father-in-law at the time, to have those ingredients shipped to them. So that sort of changed the way I thought about our sourcing. We now have a pretty dedicated and large team that focuses on sourcing and finding ingredients that we try to find bespoke suppliers and, you know, more of the artisanal ingredients that you wouldn't typically find in the store, and it gives a presence to those small brands that are more handcrafted. But we also would work with larger suppliers of food in a supply chain, but aim to work with those companies who have sort of published ethics around how they treat their own employees and the way they source or raise. Like, we don't focus on getting organic, but I'd rather work with a farmer who's local, who's going to use organic practices, even if they don't have an organic distinction. So the supply chain process is extraordinarily complex, and I'm proud of the way we've approached it. And I think a lot of the meal kits are looking to do the same type of thing.
Quick question. Who's your shipper? Who do you use for shipping?
So the question is who we use for shipping. So in the Northeast, we use FedEx. And out of LA, we use FedEx, as well as a company called OnTrack, which gets us a little bit further reach. And we just ship 1 or 2 day ground shipping, which keeps the costs lower for us and our customers, which is why we don't have 100% coverage in the United States when there are companies like FedEx that reaches anywhere, but we're limited by the 1 and 2 day reach of the truck.
I mean, the reason why I'm asking is that if you think about the idea of a food kit delivered to the home is sort of the notion of what we want. Sorry, The notion of a food kit delivered to your house just struck me as, when I talked last week about what we want when we want it, it's the classic example. We literally have it delivered to our door. And think about just the revolution in technology of delivery and how that's made it possible. Something that we wouldn't have conceived of 10, 15, 20 years ago. So that's just struck me as an interesting thought. Anyway, Liz, you got it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my question is for Andy. So regarding the concern that you were talking about of people who are dealing with overweight and obesity, who are at risk for diabetes and hypertension and heart disease, do you find that those people who are at risk for those kinds of diseases are the clientele that are subscribing to Purple Carrot and other like healthy meal kits? And if not, do you plan to, or do you have any ideas of how to expand it to make it accessible to those people?
I love that. It's a great question. So, you know, as context, as I said, I was a pharmaceutical marketer for many years and always believed in the value of Western medicine to cure what ails us. And watched a documentary in January of 2014 called Forks Over Knives, which talks about the value of a plant-based diet as sort of the antidote to the large consumption of meat and dairy in this country. And it brought to light to me the idea of food as medicine and to address a lot of these chronic conditions that I was looking to treat in my past lives, and then looked at a plant-based diet as that antidote. So I don't have any quantitative data on sort of the body mass index of my customers, so to speak. And I don't say that in a glib manner, I can't give you an honest assessment of that. What we're trying to do is raise the awareness of plant-based eating. And there's a lot of studies that are out there that do show the benefit of following a plant-based diet. And that's, again, not preaching veganism, but to just add more plants, like I've talked about with your new word of the day, balancitarianism. That the more people learn about that, my hope is that more people who are chronically obese or who are diabetic or pre-diabetic because they are hooked on sugar, and which is largely what drives that your friend in front of you asked the question about why this behavior still exists in our culture. There's such a level of addiction, I think, driven by the large food companies that have trained us all to want these very quick food, things to satisfy the low sugar that we might have, and you get that highly preserved item. So you're trained to eat all that. So we have a long way to go, I think, in our society to teach more people. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are in lower socioeconomic categories that do have those chronic conditions because of they live in food deserts, or you go to Newark, New Jersey, and it's a bunch of concrete and fast food companies, and that's not the way for someone to get a piece of nice green lettuce or something, and they're going to eat better. So there's a large problem out there. I think what we're trying to do as a company is raise that awareness and make it available to more and more people.
Can I just comment on it for 1 second?
Sure.
Because this is not a scientific answer, but it is something that I've really observed over the past many years of talking to people about food. There are 3 points in people's lives where they seem to be willing to change their natural food habits. And one is in college, when they're sort of deracinated from the family eating pattern for the first time. The second point seems to be when they have their first child. And the third is when they're older and they're either sick or worried about getting sick. And almost every time in between, people can't make a radical change. There has to be some kind of disruptive change in their life. But I think that there's a general consciousness of the kind of things that Andy's doing, are people know that it's going the right way. And knowing that something is going the right way really starts channeling people's choices. I love the part about being sort of a vegan in moderation. I love that. That was
Great.
I'd just like to comment on that as well. You were talking about plant-based diets, so the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative that Chris and I are both members of, and the university is invited to participate. It's based on the Menus of Change principles, which are not preaching, but advocating for a plant-based diet. So we've been doing that at the university for about 2 years. Sugary beverages are down about 10%, sodium's down 30%, whole grains are up, and more, I think produce is up another 10%. So it's definitely, I mean, our students are definitely adjusting to that, and they're interested, and we're certainly not 100% plant forward by any means, but it's definitely a language we're using on campus.
Hi, I think my question is predominantly for Anastacia and Andrew. I'm specifically interested in the responsibility for future technological advances in food science. So while I assume that there is a very large contribution made by the government to those 80 food science centers around the country, I also know that the venture capital industry, or equity industry in the US has blossomed over the last 20 years or so. And so I'm just curious to know whether you think the public sector or the private sector will be driving the future changes, and what might they look like?
Well, I actually, this process that I described is ongoing, and there are a lot of things that are coming out of the military now and are affecting our food chain. I actually have a couple of them in here, but that are entering the supermarket. For example, let's see, I have, okay, so there's there are all sorts of new preservation techniques coming out of the military, out of research that was done. And you'll never find too much stuff in there. During the late 1990s, they decided that they wanted to find new ways to preserve food that didn't involve heat. And that's the gold standard, and the reason it's the gold standard for packaged foods is because the biggest problem with packaged food is what? The fear of microbial contamination and making people sick, right? So the way that you can kill harmful bacteria is you heat something to the boiling point, and you hold it at the boiling point for a certain amount of time, depending on what the item is. But that also really changes the flavor. And so the Army invested in all this research into these new techniques, and they are now appearing in the marketplace. One of them is called high-pressure processing, which preserves, you have a good word, I knew where you were going to talk about. All right, which uses immense pressure on food to kill any microorganisms that might be inside, but because it's not cooked, it maintains kind of the fresh flavor, texture, and most of the nutrients. And this has snuck into the supermarket, and you find it like anything, like these guacamoles that you can get that are chilled, any hummus, salsas, the fresh juices that you buy, like Bolton Farms, Green Machine, all those things, those are preserved using what they call cold pasteurization, which is this immense pressure. And it's finally used to preserve deli meats that I was talking about earlier. So that's just one of them. There are a whole bunch of them that are coming online, including one called microwave-assisted thermal sterilization, which is going to produce a product like a TV dinner that you can just put on your shelf in the pantry. You don't have to refrigerate it, you just let it sit there. So these things are all going to be coming online, and people are already using them. I actually, a couple months ago, I went to a Starbucks and I started to laugh out loud because literally in my path, as I was like waiting for my coffee, there were all sorts of treats that were based on RV technology. So this is something that is there, and because these things are so enticing, they offer such incredible possibilities. If you don't have to chill something, it really, I'm sure you can speak to that. If you didn't have to have a refrigerator to keep your products and things didn't go bad, then you can save a lot of money. So this is a huge pressure that's going to be pushing the market in that direction in the future and for a long time to come. So I would say that public sector funding, and particularly military funding, is still going to influence food. I'm going to answer that side. Private industry, again, they tend to want to keep their research proprietary and not share it. And they're also trying to perfect things and create a little niche for themselves that other people can't do. So it tends not to be these sort of big issues, and it doesn't maybe drive the overall sort of like, new trends in how to preserve food. And I know that other people answered me industrial side.
I would say to keep it really interesting and sizzling here, I'll take the counterpoint that it is totally going to be in the private sector that innovation occurs. That when you're in the market for a new car, all you notice are car commercials. So I do see the world through the lens that I look at, which is seeing venture money getting into the food world. So I read today, I don't know, like by show of hands, who likes bacon? Right? Pretty damn tasty little treat, especially when you get it well done. So I like crispy bacon. I read today that there is a bacon-like product now that is being made from seaweed, and that it just raised much money, and that that's going to be some new innovation. So I look at it that there will be private money, a lot of money in Silicon Valley, primarily not New York as well, of course, that is funding the growth of food tech. And you saw, if you noticed, one of the slides I put up is a very broad swath of the food tech industry. And I think that a lot of investors are, they looked at food as sort of the next thing to tech, as what's the next big area to invest in. And I believe that there will be a lot of cool innovations that come out of it to complement the very perfect problem.
Hello. I live in an apartment building with 10 units on one floor, and everybody but me is at 20 or 30 something, and I see just numbers and numbers of food kit boxes in the package delivery area, and vast amounts of packaging showing up in the restroom, in the refuse room.
Yep.
And I'm wondering how you figure the use of packaging in with your calculations about environmental impact and thinking about your product.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is about how we think about the environmental impact of packaging with respect to meal kits. And what you've hit upon is really the number one pain point across all of the meal kits out there, that people say, I love this idea, but God, I feel so guilty because look at all the packaging and the waste. So, as a plant-based meal kit that prides itself on trying to be aligned with sort of the broader ethos of being good to the environment, it is incumbent upon us, even though we're sort of the little guy in the category, to find innovation. So next week, as a matter of fact, we are going to be using the first 100% curbside recyclable insulation. That's right. So to your earlier point, you need food to stay cold, so it tends to go in a box with insulation and gel packs, and then a lot of plastic for the bags to hold the items. So we're replacing the insulation we have been using with new, slightly more expensive insulation that will be 100% curbside recyclable, and moving to recyclable gel packs, which we haven't used to date, but we're about to introduce those. And then we have something really cool that I can't tell you about yet, that is coming soon, that will make us, I think, the only company with 100% curbside recyclable and environmentally, sort of having the smallest environmental impact that we can make in the category. But it's definitely a real issue, and my hope, broadly speaking, is that as the meal kit category has grown, that there will be more and more innovation from the vendors that call on us to say, hey, buy our stuff and use it in your meal kit.
Hi, thanks guys for the panel. I was wondering, just a question for all of you. I was wondering, what do you guys think in terms of the organic versus local labeling? Like, before there was a huge movement for organic, and everyone was slapping the organic label on their product, and it commanded a higher price. Do you think having a local label, although it's not regulated as organic is, do you think that can command as high, if not higher, of a price, or organic sort of still wins?
I'll definitely speak to that. Here's the thing. Organic can be wonderful. And organic at a large scale makes a lot of sense to me, because especially if you can prod the large-scale agro-industrial movement to be lighter on pesticides, lighter on chemicals, anything that brings them closer to organic is good. But do I think organic that comes to me from Australia is as good as buying turnips that were grown in Natick? I don't. But do I think that always I would choose local over a product that was raised well, that might have been raised in Arkansas or raised in New Jersey? I don't. So I think that you end up making essentially good food choices. I don't think organic is good or bad. I think it's a way of careful stewardship of the land and the water and the animals and the plants that you raise. And I do think it's expensive because it's still only 4% of the market. So there's a huge, and it's not particularly protected well, although new organic standards were just announced today by the Obama administration. I haven't had a chance to look at them. But if you can buy local, organic or not, then you're buying food in Massachusetts especially, we're at the end of this food chain. So you can buy organic food that comes to us from a very long way, and in some ways it can be more efficient to buy organic food that comes from a very long way, depending on what the transportation system is. But if we don't support local, and there's some major disruption in the transportation system, or there's a weather problem, or there's a strike, we run out of food in New England in something like 3.5 days, and that's canned food as well. It isn't just fresh carrots and polybags on the shelf. So when you're making a decision, I think organic is great. People work very hard. It's extremely complicated to be 100% certified organic. But I think local matters. I think natural matters not at all because it's a label that has absolutely no bite. But make decisions that look about how it relates back to the food system. So if it's organic, but it's coming to you from Chile, it's different than if it's natural and it's coming to you from, someplace that you could actually drive to, or somebody with a long-haul truck could drive to. That's sort of my thought on it. Just that's slavish one way or the other.
Let me follow up that. I mean, sort of. I think. Do you think the story? Sorry. Do you think the story of local is maybe more dominant now, or becoming more important to people than the story of organic in terms of the marketplace kind of feel?
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting, 5 or 6 years ago, if you looked at menus, restaurant menus, they would be touting organic. Things were organic. Now, most of the restaurant menus are touting the local, where it was farmed, how it was raised. Although I got into a very complicated conversation with the folks from Nyman Ranch, and Nyman Ranch is a collective of responsibly raised animals. Primarily, they're mostly in the Midwest and in the Far West. And the question was, did I care about the lamb that I buy being local, or the pork that I buy being local, or did I care about how it was raised? And I have to tell you that I haven't finished thinking about that. It's, these are not simple questions, but they're also, when it comes down to it, to paraphrase the wonderful Michael Pollan, eat whole foods, eat plants, eat foods that you can describe. And if they're local, good. If they're organic, good and better. But basically, buy food that is less like the wonderful things that Anastacia has discovered, and more like the kind of things that Andy is putting in packages, and very much like the things that that Maureen is putting on in the dining rooms at Northeastern. That's sort of my philosophy of it. Go for real food.
Anybody else want to come in?
I don't think I could.
Good.
I don't think I can say more than that. I think you did a great job describing. For us here, I think it's certainly local. It's more our focus. Organic, we do sell some organic stuff, but mostly in the retail locations. But we find that the price point's a little high for some of our typically students who we're primarily focused on. But local, like Chris said, I mean, the story, we try to tell the story. We have a green plan on our website that talks about local, the farmers that we work with, and if it's a local place that we're sourcing to. So local seems to be on campus anyway, definitely a priority over organic. And it's a lot of it has to do with price point. But like, I agree with all the when you said that.
Can I just sorry, I just want to follow up on that. I mean, I think what you're talking also about, and this sort of just feel free to embellish on this, is that 20, 30 years ago, we didn't ask the question where food came from. And I think if we're talking about why we take and how, I mean, one of the interesting points is that we want to know more the story of our food. I mean, Andy, I think you've discovered that. I think Maureen, I know definitely you discovered it, Louisa, the story of our food and the authenticity question. I think a lot of younger folks especially are asking the authenticity question. So.
You know, I think that's spot on. The authenticity is a big word. I think even words like handcrafted feels to me to be kind of, you know, in the current vernacular for people to think about that. It goes to the whole story idea that you talked about. And at least there's a belief, I think, among marketers that people want to hear a story and feel like there is a connection to see what that farmer looks like or where she grows her food or, you know, any of those kinds of components that does tap into a lot of the millennial thinking that I think they're the largest cohort that is driving the need for transparency from both big food and smaller companies, and they want to see that kind of clarity and demand that of the manufacturers.
Excellent presentations. I have a question that is relevant to Andy and Anastacia. How expensive are the meals and how many people can afford it? Because many health organizations, American Heart Association for instance, give simple advice, eat vegetables and fruit for protection from cardiovascular disease and diabetes and so on and so forth. And most people may not be able to afford it at all. So this is one question, the question of the cost, whether everybody can afford to have packaged meals that you produce, or only few that they have the means. And the second question is for Anastacia, the foods that are processed and packaged by the military for specific purposes, how much of the nutritional values and ingredients they lose, vitamins, other ingredients that are important for health. And third question, when these things are cooked, for instance in microwave, how much do they lose?
So thanks, those are all good questions. The one directed to me was around price. So we sell our meal kits at $68 for a box that has 3 different meals that are intended to each feed 2 people. So the way we think about the economics of that is it's basically 6 plates of food and it's $11.33 per plate. Now, there have been some studies both about purple carrot and I think it was blue apron and maybe plated, that looked at if someone were to go to the grocery store and buy each of the ingredients in our meals, that ironically it comes out that the meal kits are less, and I believe, I don't want to misrepresent it, but I believe that it was given the precise amounts. So if you're going to make a dish that calls for hoisin sauce or something, right? And you don't have hoisin sauce, but you really want to make that dish, you're going to buy a bottle of hoisin sauce for $4.79. You're going to use the 2 teaspoons required in that recipe, and then it sits in your pantry for a year and you throw it out. So I think there may be some criticism of the meal kit category in general, that it may not be for everyone, but I don't actually think it's intended to be for everyone, and I don't make any apologies for that necessarily. I think that what we do is we put out a great product at a very fair price that has a massive amount of complexity to deliver what we do on a week in and week out basis and try to provide it at a fair and reasonable cost. I think that ours in particular probably comes in about the middle of the band of the meal kits that are out there in terms of where we price.
Do you find that a lot of people adopting meal kits are actually adopting them instead of going out to eat?
That's a good question. I think that there is a bit of a trend now for people to cook at home, and I mentioned that in my presentation, but it's like staying home and cooking is now like the new date night, and that there is something really nice about being able to cook at home and controlling what you're eating and doing it. Maybe you're going to open up a bottle of wine or something and just relax and cook with a friend or your partner or spouse, what have you. and that may be, in fact, replacing going out.
Okay, your question is, do rations lose nutritional value in the processing? I want to go back to, I think something I said at the very end, which is rations are used in a very special and extreme and limited circumstance. So when we're talking about combat rations, we're talking about all these foods that are literally processed, created, packaged, a year, 2 years ahead of time on American soil, shipped around the globe, or airdropped someplace. These are foods that people are eating to sustain themselves because there aren't other choices. I want to make that clear. That said, most of the things are preserved using thermal sterilization, which I said is cooking for a long time, and that tends to lose a little bit of nutrients. However, the military does a tremendous job at enriching and fortifying the foods. It adds back in a lot of nutrients that are lost, as do most processed food companies. So it would have what are called the macronutrients. Those are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins pretty much intact. And then the vitamins that might be lost through heat processing or through over time are added in. And one of the things that the Army has been working on that will be hitting the consumer market probably in this decade is a whole process about encapsulating these nutrients and time releasing them so that they really can last for a long time and will be of value. So it probably does a pretty good job for what it's worth. In terms of heating, the only way these things, sometimes they're eaten at room temperature or desert temperature or Norway temperature, whatever it would be. And there is a ration heater, which is a bag that is heated by a exothermic reaction with magnesium and iron and so forth. And pouring water, it heats it up very briefly. It's not microwave. It probably doesn't lose too much more of its nutritional value.
The microwave heating poses any dangers?
Microwave, by the way, came out of military research way back, again, during World War II, and it was originally, used for radar, and then became something that was applied to foods.
Well, the question is there any, loss of nutrients from microwaving?
In general?
Yeah.
I don't know anything. I can't really answer that question.
Okay. We have time for one more question. Amanda.
Thank you all for coming again. I'm going to try to sum up all the thoughts that have been racing through my mind succinctly, but I guess I'm just wondering if each of you could share sort of your visions for the future of food and consumerism in this nation. And I think this stemmed from a thought I had about the balance between convenience and health. And I also wonder, Andy, if you could maybe share your perspective on coming from the pharmaceutical industry and seeing pharmaceutical drugs almost as, I don't want to be insensitive, but perhaps a crutch if people took the time to cook. And also if you see purple carrot as a permanent solution to food consumerism in this nation, like will everyone be getting boxes delivered to their houses in the next decade, or is that more of a transitional product as people learn to reclaim home cooking and shopping?
So I really hope that everyone in America starts getting purple carrot and hear about to God's ears, as they say. So you had a lot of good questions there, and I'll answer briefly and pass the mic along to my guys colleagues up here. So I think that a couple of points. One is that I too see pharmaceutical medicine as like the savior, and now I do see it as a bit of a crutch to a degree. I think that there are some diseases out there that are really well treated with medicine, and I can't deny that. I think that the idea of food as medicine is material. I can just, like from a personal experience, I was diagnosed about 4.5 years ago with Crohn's disease, and it was really miserable for a brief period of time. I had surgery, and then I sort of got like a new lease on life. Nobody told me to change my diet, and I kind of was almost back in the same place, and I've started to follow more of a plant-based diet for the last 2 years. I've noticed a material change, but by the same token, I also use a drug called Remicade, which is an exorbitantly expensive product that, thank God, my health insurance covers for me. And I'm living a very perfectly normal life from that perspective. So I don't feel like I'm a Crohn's patient, but I attribute some of that to pharmaceutical medicine and the innovation there. Could I leave that drug and just focus only on other things? Maybe, but I also do have that crutch. So I'll be just as guilty as the next person, and I'll try to find the balance as I espouse about being a balancitarian and probably most things. I think the more people cook, though, with respect to food and consumerism, the better off we will all be. I think, as I riffed on briefly, there is a lot of addiction in our country to quick and easy and fast and convenient that fast food hits on, and a lot of highly processed foods hit on. And it's easy to just nuke some chicken tenders or have your mac and cheese or have the pizza in the oven and just get quick because everyone's in such a hurry. That seems to be a trend that I observe. And that when people do take a bit more time to cook at home and they slow down and they control what they're eating and think more about the food and have an awareness and a consciousness about the food they're eating, I can't help but imagine that will have a more positive effect across the board.
I really agree with everything that Andy just said, but I'm a big fan of food kits. I've only done it for a couple of weeks because I'm a good cook. But what I see is that the idea of the food coming to people's houses increases their likelihood that they'll cook it. And it's kind of extraordinary to me because it's cooking literacy, culinary literacy is a thing that we've lost. I mean, through the whole episode of fast food dinners and every other thing. People don't know how to cook, and they get a chance to have their own in-house tutor when they go through these kits. I don't think they're a long-term solution, but I think they're great as part of the rehabilitation of American cooking. I really do. I wish there were a program like this, or I wish there were meal kits that would go to low-income houses. It would be all set. All they really would have to do is open the box, put it in the pot, do this, do that, boom, dinner. Because the only thing that people who don't cook have less of than money is time. And to me, when people talk about food deserts and everything else, and they want to, and I'm very encouraging of people who want to have more fresh food in all sorts of communities. But truthfully, the most useful thing we could do is get people fresh, healthy food that they can have on the table in 10 minutes. And with many of these food kits, you can do that. So in your next, when this is wildly successful, go into that part of the business. But can I just say, I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of food. In my short part of my adulthood, it's gotten so much better. People are so interested in it. They do not consider dinner to be what I might have considered dinner to be when I made my kids American chop suey all the time for dinner. I mean, people eat better and they care more about food, and it's only going to get better and better. Because once you learn the difference between good food and bad food, you never prefer the bad food. Guilty pleasures aside, you never prefer the bad food. So everybody should be pretty optimistic. The changes that have happened in the last decade are really phenomenal. And I think good food is a human right. So that's sort of my take on it. I'll pass the baton.
And thanks for that great question. I agree with my colleagues here. And also, what I think we'd like to see more of it on campus is maybe taking a more active role in teaching our students how to cook. Some know how to cook. Most of them are very interested in how to cook. Spreading food into the curriculum. We have, right now we're probably collaborating with at least 5 different professors in different schools. And bless you. And students and faculty are very interested, a lot of people doing research. And sort of how can we, help with the education around food and food literacy and culinary literacy. So I think that is because people are very excited about food, particularly, I know it's very much here in campus.
I don't think I'm a good closer. Because I actually think that the influence is going the other way, and I think these are all very optimistic things, but I think there's somewhat in a bubble. I think that overall the country is still moving more toward convenience and prepared foods. And I think that the statistics on consumer purchases bear that out. However, my news is not all bad, because having made my foray into sort of the heart of where those processed foods get developed, there are things that are actually emerging from food science that are making those prepared and convenience foods better. And so one of the good things is we can now get, if you go into the store and you get a bagged salad that's ready to eat, that actually came out of military technology to preserve fresh foods to send to Vietnam in the 1960s, where we have more things that are prepared healthfully and can be preserved for a longer period of time. And you know what? I say more power to it. If I can go to the supermarket, grab a couple of things and have them be pretty healthy and serve them to my family and spend my time doing what I want to do, I think that's a good thing. So I think that in a certain sense, these things are converging. We're going to have more prepared and convenience foods, but they're going to be better for us. So let's open up our I don't want to say our hearts and our minds to this idea that we can have it all, sort of. Thank you.
Real quick with another quick anecdote. My mother, who, when I was growing up, stayed at home, cooked. As soon as everyone was in high school, she went back to the work world. And then later on, when we come visiting, and she'd have every kind of trick processed food around just to keep, so if she wanted to cook up a meal, she could, but she used all of the technology possible to do so. But she could still whip up a good meal from scratch. She just goes, who has time? So the tension between convenience, time, immediacy, etc. I think we had a wonderful panel tonight. Let's give them a round of applause. Next week, domestic food security. Thank you for coming out on an awfully crappy night. See you next week.